The member for Warringah, Zali Steggall, arguably the original teal T-shirt wearer, joins us now. Hi there, Zali.
Hi, good afternoon.
Now, we've heard again from the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, today that the government's 43% emissions reduction target by 2030 is, quote, a floor, not a ceiling. How encouraged are you by those comments?
Look, obviously, I think that decision for the ALP to take 43 by 2030 at the last election was a political decision. I think they were hedging their bets between the coalition position and I think a scientific position, which is we need to be at much more than 50% by 2030. So whilst I do welcome that we legislate net zero and that the government is committed to that, I think we do need to still be a little bit circumspect as to actions, because at the same time, the government appears to still be approving a significant number of gas projects and there's a lot of coal projects in the works. And in the last parliament, the Labor did vote with the coalition to frack the Northern Territory, the Beetaloo Basin for gas. Yes, I welcome the commitment and the language around climate, and I do agree that legislating the 43% commitment as a floor is okay, as long as we also then follow with action of not approving more coal, oil or gas projects, because that does need to stop.
As we know, that 43% is Labor's 23 emission target. It's significantly higher than what the coalition's was of 26 to 28. 2030, it's only 8 years away. Why isn't that enough as an interim target?
Because you need to look at it, I think the other way, you need to work backwards to actually what do we need to achieve the Paris Agreement? And the Paris Agreement is to keep global warming as close to 1.5 degrees as possible. So I think we really need to think about what our ultimate goal here is. And the ultimate goal is to keep warming in check, which means we need to move as aggressively as possible within the realms of what technology we have available to us. Now, I have looked at this, and at the last election, I took a commitment of 60% emissions reduction by 2030 because I do strongly believe we have the technology to reach that. We have the capacity to get between 55 and 60%. Nervous in the sense that if we only set our sights or expectations on 43, are we hindering business and private sector in delivering more? So I think the government has to be very careful not to put in place a policy that is so timid that it fails to really embrace all the opportunities we have.
Zali, the coalition leader Peter Dutton says they'll oppose a 43% target. The Greens leader Adam Bandt spoke on this program yesterday.
The 43% target that is being proposed is consistent with the death of the Great Barrier Reef. It's not consistent with limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees, which is what our Pacific Island neighbours are asking for to save their homes.
The climate wars, though, have dragged on now, Zali, for over a decade. Do you think the Greens should get behind a government who has a chance to legislate that target?
Well, again, I think actions speak louder than words when it comes to the government. And I'm seeing a lot of, and it's not for me to defend the Greens in this, but there's a lot of posturing going on in the media and on social media at the moment, wedging the Greens on what their mandate that they took to the election compared to what their ALP's mandate is. And, I don't think we're going to resolve this if Prime Minister Albanese takes the attitude of it's my way or the highway. You all just have to line up behind what we want to do. So I think when you talk of collaborative decision making, it's really important to follow through with that. I do believe the Greens and other crossbenchers, many of us took greater than 50% emission reduction goals to the election and were successful. So we all have a mandate from our communities to really be pushing for as greater ambition as possible. And it is true, the Great Barrier Reef is gone if we do not accelerate our emissions reduction. And so I think we have to be realistic about what the goal is, what our capacity is, and put the right mechanisms in place. So I hope we're going to see a more collaborative approach from the Albanese government on this to make sure we do bring everyone around the table.
If I can take you back to 2009, speaking of collaboration or not, the Greens in the Senate blocked Kevin Rudd's carbon pollution reduction scheme. How much of a risk do you think that there now is that this ideological clash will drag on and prevent Australia from having these meaningful targets?
Yeah, look, I think there's probably been a lot of reflection on that decision back in 2009 and the merit. But I've also heard from both sides of the fence in relation to the lack of consultation around that legislation and the reasons why positions were taken, which I think were unfortunate because obviously then my predecessor, Tony Abbott, was very successful in, his campaign against the subsequent legislation that was passed in the government between Labor and the Greens. So I think it is unfortunate we've had so much delay and we need to look forward constructively. But it does take two for all this to happen. So the government needs to be mindful not to be overly, I would say, aggressive in its take of it's our way or the highway. And if you don't come on board with our mandate, then you're responsible for ruining our opportunity. I think that's just as damaging as Peter Dutton and the coalition just still completely failing to accept that the Australian population, the vast majority, want action on climate and emissions reduction.
If you've just tuned in, Zali Steggall, the federal independent in the seat of Warringah, is talking about Australia's emissions targets on RN Drive.